G'day guys, welcome back to the Rugby League Guru podcast or on YouTube if you're joining us on the Rugby League Guru YouTube channel. Here in Bloke in a Bar Studios with the great Matty the Water Boy. Matty, welcome mate, what's doing?
What's going on? Just preparing for a bit of a drop tonight, which is exciting.
What have we got on, bloke? What is dropping tonight?
Well, cricket season, as we all know. We got the Good Areas tee. I'm wearing it now. It says Good Areas on the back.
It's one of the great sayings, isn't it?
Oh, it's the best. It's the best. And then we got the not so classic saying Tonkin Cherries, which is something Denon made up last year.
Masterclass.
Oh, it's the best. It's so I still laugh every time I hear it. And we got the yellow floppy hats. So they go on sale tonight as well.
Yeah, beautiful. So get yourself to bloke.shop.
Yep.
Get your paws on those tonight. They will go quickly. Bit of breaking news today with the Roosters. Well, you know, two of the worst kept secrets in rugby league, but also Angus Crichton. We've spoken about on Bloke in a Bar a number of times. I know that me and Matty have spoken off mic as well, that we've had this Angus Crichton re-signs with the Roosters post. I've had it ready for 18 months.
Yeah, I actually remember I made it when I was like watching a Big Bash game or something last year. Like it was over a year ago now for sure.
It's crazy.
Like I remember seeing the article and I texted to Den and I was like, hey, it's ready. I'll text you when it's official. And I never texted him.
Yeah, it's wild. And I mean, obviously, we've got a Rugby World Cup coming up next year. He's obviously got a rugby union background, came through at Scots College there, came from the country, ended up at Scots. Absolutely brained it there. If you got a couple of spare minutes, go and watch his highlights, his rugby union highlights from his year 12 season, that GPS comp. He was unbelievable. Came into first grade with the Rabbitohs, killed it. He was obviously playing in the back row, but fuck, he had inside centre of rugby union written all over him, the lines he was running. He was very impressive. Now landed at the Roosters, been there a couple of years, won one premiership there in 2019, I believe. And now he is re-signed for another 2 years, so not going to the Rugby World Cup next year. Obviously, it does leave it open though, doesn't it, Matty? We've got a Rugby World Cup in 2027, obviously being played here in Australia. It's going to be interesting as we lead up to that.
Yeah, it's a huge carrot for some of those big rugby league boys. Obviously, you got the big one is Sully that they're all talking about how he's played rugby growing up. I think Angus Crichton is probably the second one there. But you got other guys who played rugby come up as well. Like Cam Murray always talks about going to how much he loved playing rugby union for Newington as a kid. Not that I'd ever want him to leave my Rabbitohs team, but there's a few guys there who probably are seriously looking at that 2027 World Cup, and I couldn't blame him.
Yeah, and I know, like, especially in Sydney anyway, and I know with a lot of the Roosters boys, a lot of the South Sydney boys, those boys used to get filtered into, like, Maddo Sports, and they'd play league coming through high school. The vast majority of them are now getting pushed to Scots, Waverley, Newington, these sort of private schools where they play rugby union. And this is why you keep hearing more and more about these schools. So Suoliti and Penasini, where were they? At Kings, were they? Kings or Newington? One of the two.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
You've got like Mawali for South Sydney, a heap of these guys that come through Waverley, all these Scots boys and everything. So the landscape has changed a little bit in Sydney as far as where these NRL clubs are sending their players. So a lot of them are playing rugby union and being more and more involved with rugby union systems. So come 2027, when, that's a few years away now, we're still going to have a lot of the same superstars we've got now, but more will emerge as well. You would have to assume that the AAU is going to throw every fucking cent they possibly can at making the Wallabies relevant in that season. So very, very keen to see how it goes with all these guys. On Angus Crichton, though, Matty, obviously played for South Sydney a couple of years ago. He's been sensational for the Chooks. Where would you rank him as far as back rowers in rugby league? Would you be willing to say he's the best back rower in rugby league?
Oh, he's right up there. Off the top of my head, I wouldn't push back on it. He's certainly right up there as one of the best. Yeah, I probably would. I probably would say he's the best back rower in the comp at the moment.
Oh, I think he's probably been the most consistent over the last 3 years. I think he's been sensational. And I think it's been tough on him as well. I'm saying most consistent when he plays in the back row. Trent Robinson has fucked around a lot with him, using him as a middle forward, which I don't think was overly effective. I think he just has to be used as an edge guy. And that's the one thing I'm a little bit worried with Angus Crichton, that if Matt Lodge doesn't re-sign, Takiaho's leaving, Lindsay Collins, I love him, but he has got his HIA problems. I'm worried that we will see a little bit more and more of Angus Crichton getting shifted into the middle. Personally, I don't think it's the best spot to use him. I would be locking him in on that left edge, let him take over from Boyd Corner on that left side and just dominate on that edge. I love everything about Angus Crichton. I think he's going to be a starting kangaroo in their best 17. Have you got him locked in? Cam Murray on one edge, Angus on the other side?
Zero doubt in this world. Zero doubt.
I think we came into this World Cup thinking Nanai maybe, but I just think the more I see of Angus and just how consistent he is, I simply think it just has to be him. So Angus Crichton staying for another 2 years at the Sydney Roosters, a great re-signing by them. They took their time with it for whatever reason, but they have got the job done. And Angus Crichton, he'll be staying at Bondi Junction for 2 more seasons, which is a scary prospect for every other team in this competition. Now, 2 other signings that we've heard about for the last few weeks, months, whatever it might be, that the Roosters have officially announced. The first one from South Sydney, Jackson Paulo. Now, obviously had a couple of games this year where he wasn't overly impressive. Let's be honest here, he had some absolute shockers. It happens to players. He copped it left, right and centre. After that, all the online stuff that happened, which is absolute bullshit, and I hope that's none of you that are listening/watching. But then pretty soon after that, he all of a sudden was on the radar of the Sydney Roosters. And, Matty, I know you're a South Sydney fan and whatnot, but the timing was fucking weird, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was very strange. He had that game that you just pointed out, which, I mean, everyone is back. Like, he had a shocker, but it's got nothing to do with signing with the Roosters. It just happened. He just happened to have signed that week earlier. It just hadn't been announced yet. Thank fuck it hadn't been announced. Imagine if it got announced and then he had that game.
Exactly.
It would have been.
And I mean, like, as much as there was that game that wasn't impressive, last year I thought he was great for South Sydney. I was very impressed with him. The weeks leading up to that game, he also wasn't fantastic. Let's be honest here. But yeah, for him to have that game and cost so much negative attention, then at break that he was going to the Roosters, a really interesting one. More and more, there's probably signings for, and like, I don't think this is a bad signing. Don't get me wrong. I think Trent Robinson will get the very best out of Jackson Paulo. But more and more, there are signings that don't make a huge amount of sense to me from the Roosters. Kevin Nguama was another one. I wasn't really sure if they particularly needed him. So it is an interesting time. You've obviously watched probably more of Jackson Paulo than what I have, Matty. How do you think he's going to go at the Roosters? And more importantly, do you think his best position is centre or wing?
Definitely wing, 100%. Like, he's really skillful. If he cuts out his errors, he's a good player. Like, he's got all the skill in the world. I think he just needs a bit of time to cut those errors out of his game, because it can cost his team. It did show in that game, and he does do it at times. But for example, like against the Eels in that finals game a few years ago, he took that great intercept. That won us the game pretty much. He's got all the skill, and it's there. Hopefully someone like Trent Robertson can get the best out of him, because if you do get the best out of Jackson Paulo, he's a fantastic player. He just got to cut out those errors.
Yeah, it's good get. What I wonder is, I think he plays his best footy when he's playing right wing. Now, Suaalii obviously played right wing for the Chooks this year. Is there a world where they potentially short ball him over to left centre and play Jackson Paulo right wing, play Suaalii at left centre? My problem with having Suaalii at right wing, his kick returns and everything are fantastic, but God, it's tough when you've got an absolute Ferrari sitting on the right wing and your right centre is just going rogue the entire time and he's not there. I feel like Suaalii, and I want Joey Manu to do that, but I feel like the Roosters attack less on strike plays down that edge, because quite often Joey Manu is floating into the middle, as he should be with the role he's playing. Personally, I think they're better off moving Suaalii over to the left side, and maybe him and Daniel Tupou can share reps as far as going back to return kicks. What are your thoughts on that, Matty?
Yeah, I hadn't really thought of that. That sounds good to me. Like Suaalii, I always thought Suaalii should and probably would move to centre next year, but hadn't really thought of it. Like, obviously, Joey Manu's the right centre. I really haven't thought about this as much as I should have. But you're right. I think the Roosters' left centre has been kind of not a weakness, but they haven't really had anyone there for the last.
It's Drew Hutchinson at the end of the year.
Yeah, exactly. So put Suaalii there, and suddenly, I think they're a much better team. So yeah, I really like that. And
there's no shock as well when you look back at, the great centres over the last few years. Your GI was a magician on that left side. Latrell Mitchell. That's where the vast majority of players, their pass from right to left is a lot better than left to right. So you always sort of want your strike centre to be on the left edge, in my opinion. So I would love to have Suaalii out on that side. I think it'd be a fantastic spot for him. So I can understand the signing from that regard if you are going to shake up the team in that manner. The other one that's really interesting is Jake Turpin. Now, Jake Turpin, it wasn't that long ago he was the captain of the Brisbane Broncos. All of a sudden it felt like he wasn't in their top 3 hookers overnight. It all just changed completely. We didn't see him for a lot of this season, in and out of the side, disappeared for a while there. There was reports that an injury and all this sort of stuff. He was playing a bit of Queensland Cup though. I think we saw him again at the back end of the season, but he really fell off the radar very quickly at the Brisbane Broncos. And let's be honest here, the guys they replaced him with, Matty, none of them really set the world alight at the end of the day.
No, like you had Billy Walters in there in the middle of the year, and they were kind of all just kicking each other out, going back in, and it kind of they kept going sideways. Put it that way. I think, and we just spoke about this before. I think maybe they've had a look at Brandon Smith's hooker of the year as we spoke about earlier, and maybe thought maybe we should have a hooker on the bench, and maybe getting rid of Verrills wasn't the best idea, because the moment Verrills signed with Gold Coast, he started killing it again. So maybe they've thought, okay, we need to get a kind of specialist hooker in there whilst Brandon Smith transitions into that number 9 spot, possibly.
I would say the thing with Verrills, I reckon he would have got some big bicky to go up there to the Gold Coast Titans.
Yeah, that's
I think
true.
Without a doubt. So I think that I agree with you. I wouldn't have let him go, but the money they would have had to have paid to keep him compared to the money they probably got to give Jake Turpin an opportunity, I reckon there could be a $300,000 or $400,000 gap there, to be honest. Yeah, I reckon it could be massive. So salary cap wise, it might make sense. And as Matty said, we spoke about it earlier. We just recorded a show before. We were talking about the greatest hookers of all time, and we were talking about the future of hookers. Brandon Smith came up, and whether we see him actually being an 80-minute hooker, I think me and Matty both agree. We don't see him being an 80-minute hooker. I think Jake Turpin will be in this side. I think he'll probably be the 14. You have got guys like Hutcho, obviously, Adam Kieran, these guys that play a utility role who can play 9 if need be. But if you're bringing a guy like Turpin into the club, I'd be a little bit surprised if he's not given an opportunity to actually play. So the way that I see it playing out, I think that Brandon Smith, he'll play a lot of the game at hooker. I think he'll come off for a spell. Turpin will go on. And then I wouldn't be surprised if you see Brandon Smith later in the game come on and play as a middle forward, sort of almost like he has done for the Melbourne Storm over the last few years. I think he's just one of the best momentum guys in rugby league. I think he could play an 80-minute hooker role if you needed him to. But the beauty of Brandon Smith is that he's got a wider skill set than just playing as a 9. As I said, I think he's the best momentum guy in rugby league. There's a lot of different ways. As always, the Roosters, they leave themselves with many options of how they want to deal with things. But I'll be honest with you, these two signings, they surprised me when I first heard them. They probably surprised me a little bit now that they've come through. But I'm never going to doubt Trent Robinson and his ability. I'm sure that he will get it right by the time the season comes around, with probably Turpin off the bench. And I think Jackson Paulo probably on the right wing. Anything else to add on that, Matty?
No, not really. I'm glad for the Roosters that they finally were able to lock up Angus Crichton, because that's just been floating around for the last year, and I suspect they would have got a little bit nervous, the Roosters fans.
Without knowing, I imagine Roosters fans would have. I'd love to know what was the whole story behind why it took so long.
Well, wasn't there a thing earlier, like in the middle of the year, that they didn't have enough money for him or something? Like all those headlines started coming out. So, yeah, I'd love to know what happened.
I'd love to know if Angus has been sitting there for the last few months going, fuck, what's going to happen? Or if he just knew it'd be okay. It was just a matter of time until it got sorted. An interesting situation. I think there would have been a pretty clear communication line there between club and player. I think both parties would have known exactly what was going on. And as always, a sign of a good club, Matty, nothing gets out.
Oh, nothing ever gets out of the Roosters.
The only thing you've heard about Angus Crichton over the last few months is people like us guessing.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. 100%.
Incredible sign of a good club. 3 good re-signings there. Really looking forward to seeing what Trent Robinson gets out of all of them.